I think it's a very difficult situation, and I draw a comparison. The rollout or the whole sort of crisis is a little bit like the virus itself. It keeps on mutating. So last year it was all about money and the rescue package and calming the markets down and making sure that things don't get worse on the economic side. And now it's all about how to roll things out. I guess my first observation is to say the EU has the negotiating power. That was a good thing. Had it been just a small member state trying to get these doses, they would have never gotten them. But it doesn't look good right now.
What do you make of the analysis that it shouldn't be first come, first serve in terms of when people manage to secure those contracts with AstraZeneca? AstraZeneca have said the UK were 3 months ahead, for example, and that's why it's been easier for them to get the doses that they've ordered.
Well, I haven't looked at the minute detail of the contract itself. But I can imagine that if the European Commission comes out with a strong statement, as it did yesterday, making a claim that the claims of AstraZeneca are wrong, then the Commission knows what it's doing. So in that sense, I believe that there hasn't been a first come, first serve clause. But these are unfortunate hiccups when you try to roll out complex doses like we are doing at the moment.
Is a hiccup a fair description when what's going to happen is in the first quarter, as our correspondent just explained there, the EU is only going to receive a quarter of the doses that it was expecting?
Yeah, I think we're all facing a new situation. It's a very difficult one, both for the companies and then the other contractual party. Of course, we'd love to live in a world where everything would work perfectly and the rollout would go exactly as expected. But that simply does not happen in these kinds of cases. I think it's a good thing that the European Union and especially the European Commission negotiated X amount of doses for the European Union. And it is, of course, the job of the companies to stick to their commitments. That's the starting point. Then, of course, the big question is, are the member states going to be able to roll out the vaccine and give them out? I hope they will, and I'm sure they will.
What strategy do you think the EU should be taking? They've said some fairly stern things. They're obviously upset and angry. They've now said they've had a constructive meeting. Would it have been better to say, AstraZeneca, how can we help you solve these problems, rather than the slightly more threatening tone they have taken?
Well, I think probably AstraZeneca needs to look a little bit at its communication strategy as well. I'm not very convinced that the way in which the company and especially its CEO came out early on in this discussion was conducive to diplomatic and constructive discussion for the future. You must remember that part of this COVID situation is also about public relations and communications. And do you remember in the beginning of the crisis, the EU took about 2 to 3 weeks to get its act together in communication, and the same thing is happening now. I think the only thing that's going to solve the issue from a communications perspective is a robust and effective rollout of the vaccines. So basically, it's all going to be about numbers. Can the EU stick to the aim of having 70% of the population vaccinated by the summer? Can the companies provide the number of doses that they promised? And that sort of line is going to be the key about communication.
Has this been a bit of a PR disaster for the EU? Some of the British press are really hailing this as the successes of Brexit, and that's why they're able to vaccinate their population faster. How does the EU remedy that perception problem?
Well, it's a very difficult one to do because it has to be based on facts. And of course, the British press is the British press and has its own way of expressing and explaining the situation. But I think the only way that the EU can sort of come clear out of this one is by giving the figures and getting the rollout going. The problem, of course, for the Commission is going to be that once the rollout happens, it is not going to get the credit. The member states and the political leaders in the member states are going to take the credit. So the way in which these things usually work is that at home you say, oh, it's the fault of Brussels when things go bad, and then everything that goes good and well is thanks to me. So in that sense, I think the Commission is between a rock and a hard place. But I do think that it's doing a fairly good job on this, and I'm sure the rollout will eventually happen.
Let's just talk very briefly, we can, about the rollout in Finland. There's very high support in Finland in comparison to some other EU countries to get the vaccine, but the pace of the delivery of the vaccines has been reduced because of the Pfizer vaccine delay problems. And Finland is one of the countries that have said we'll delay when people get the second dose of the vaccine. How do you think it's going, and how do the public in the country perceive the rollout too?
Well, I hate to disappoint you, but as a former Prime Minister of Finland, I take no issue in affairs that take place in Finland at the moment. I can only make comments about what's happening in Italy at the moment. But I can give you, one hint is that my dad is 85 and he'll get vaccinated this week, and his fiancée is 80 and she'll get vaccinated next week. And I myself have been following this also because I'm traveling back and forth between Italy and Finland. So I'm looking at the way in which things are done, both in terms of vaccines and in terms of testing. And I, as a humble consumer, perhaps former prime minister, have no complaints to make.